to get
whatever
settled, and then we'll be underway.
Whatever you want, it's fine with me.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I think we are ready to go, to follow the schedule. So good morning, good afternoon, and good night to all the participants, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Wei Fan. I'm a director of CAMMSE and also professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering Department here at the UNC Charlotte. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 4th annual CAMMSE Virtual Research Symposium. As many of you know, CAMMSE is a 6-year multi-campus Tier 1 University Transportation Center funded by US Department of Transportation, beginning in November 2016 under the FAST Act. The theme of CAMMSE is to address the research priority area of improving mobility of people and goods by conducting multidisciplinary, multimodal research, education work, and workforce development and technology transfer. Now, at this stage, I would like to introduce our Dean, Dr. Robert Keynton, to you and cordially invite him to give his welcome remarks. Dean Keynton, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Wei. Hello and welcome, everyone. As Wei has said, I am Rob Keynton, Dean of the Williams States Lee College of Engineering here at UNC Charlotte. And on behalf of the university and college, I welcome you to the Center for Advanced Multimodal Mobility Solutions and Education Research Symposium. We are pleased to have you join us today for this symposium, and we look forward to the engaging discussions. Here at the Williams States Lee College of Engineering, we highly value public-private partnerships, hands-on learning, and developing novel methodologies for educating our engineering students. This, to me, is one of the wonderful aspects of the CAMMSE program, is that this program is also embodying these principles that we have here at the Williams States Lee College. We also see it as being a very strong priority, both at the college as well as the university, as it has been designated as one of the areas to be part of another area, which is our Smart Cities initiative, as an area for the areas of research excellence. So we thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future to advance CAMMSE research, as well as to train the next generation of professionals working in the transportation industry. Now, I'd like to turn the podium back over to you, Wei.
Okay, thank you very much, Dean Keynton, for both your kind welcome remarks and your continued support of CAMMSE. We truly appreciate it. Okay, you might have seen from the booklet, this 1.5-day symposium program includes 2 great keynote presentations to be given by 2 world-renowned faculty researchers, and 1 invited speaker session and connected and automated vehicles, as well as 3 technical sessions on multimodal transportation on the first day. Then on the second day, we will have 2 dedicated student lightning presentation sessions. I hope that this virtual event will provide opportunity to exchange ideas, foster collaborations, and generate new ideas. On behalf of the symposium organizing committee, we're glad to have you join us, and I hope that you will enjoy the symposium. Thank you all very much. Now, before we start, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. The first, that you will be muted throughout the session, and any questions regarding how to earn professional development hours, please contact Dr. Martin Kane at this email address, which is martin.kane@uncc.edu. And any question, and also all sessions will be and are being recorded. We will share a link with you after the event is completed. And we also welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share them with your colleagues later on. So now, as we mentioned, we have two outstanding keynote lectures. It's with my great honor that I may introduce you our first keynote speaker, Dr. Chris Hendrickson. So Dr. Chris Hendrickson is the Hampshire University Professor Emeritus, Director of the Traffic 21 Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, member of the National Academy of Engineering, and Editor-in-Chief of the ASC Journal of Transportation Engineering, Part A system. He has co-authored 8 books. In addition, he has published numerous articles in the professional literature. So Dr. Hendrickson pioneered models of dynamic traffic simulation, traffic equilibrium and simulation, including time of day departure demand models. He was an early contributor to the development of a probabilistic network analysis, lifeline planning after seismic events. His work in construction project management emphasized the importance of the owner's viewpoint throughout the project lifecycle. With others at the Carnegie Mellon Engineering Design Research Center, he developed a pioneering experimental building design system in the early 1990s that spanned initial concept through construction scheduling and animation. So the title of his presentation today is Near-Term Steps to Accelerate Deep Decarbonization of the United States Transportation. Now, Dr. Chris Hendrickson made a video on his practice run in case of glitches yesterday and suggested that we play it now without worrying about screen sharing. So that said, however, I would like to make you aware that Dr. Hendrickson is here online with us. So if you have any questions during his presentation, please put them into chat so that he may answer them there. If there's a time available, he will also gladly take some questions after the video is done. So with that, please join me in welcoming our CAMMSE's honorable friend, Dr. Chris Hendrickson.
Good morning. It's a very great pleasure to join you. You can see I'm in Pittsburgh and we have the fall leaves out. This is actually a picture from last year, but the trees are still very, very nice. I'm Chris Hendrickson and I'll be talking to you about deep decarbonization. Let me try sharing my screen. There we go. I'm going to talk about near term. By near term, I'm talking 5 to 20 years, steps that might be taken to accelerate deep decarbonization. And I'm going to be focusing on US transportation modes, as I assume that's the interest of most of you in the audience. I'm at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, as I said. I'm director of the Traffic 21 Institute there, which is our umbrella organization for transportation. We also have the Mobility 21 University Transportation Center here at Carnegie Mellon headquartered. Motivation for deep decarbonization should be pretty familiar to most of you. First, we're all experiencing climate change that's due to greenhouse gas emissions. The climate change is resulting in sea level rise, extreme heat, droughts. The Southwest is still in drought, and various forms of extreme weather like the cold that hit Texas last year. We are still experiencing conventional air emissions health effects, particularly particulate matters. And of course, transportation is in a emitter of particulates. We have issues of long-term sustainability. Fossil fuels are a finite resource. At some point, we're going to run out of them. And so we need to start thinking about alternatives. A fourth thing that's driving interest in deep decarbonization is the ongoing technology development in alternatives to fossil fuels. So things like battery electric vehicles are now commercially available. Wind turbines are commercially available. But we tend to have a lack of US manufacturing for these alternatives. And so we need to build up manufacturing capabilities here in the United States. And finally, the political and business tides may be turning towards decarbonization. There's a great deal of interest among a number of corporations in trying to pursue deep decarbonization. And certainly the political world has been talking about issues similar to the ones I'll be talking about quite extensively. This is an example of what I'm talking about for deep decarbonization. This is a potential trajectory for net zero emissions. This graph goes from about 1990 up to 2050, so 30 years into the future. The vertical axis is million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And you can see that there are non-CO2 gases in kind of the orangish sort of color here. There's carbon dioxide. There are land seeks in the gray. And you can see that we've been bumping along with a slight decrease. And if we did business as normal, we'd probably go out something close to this dotted line. Instead, if we start enacting a trajectory towards net zero, we'd start seeing a drop in greenhouse gas emissions down to a net zero amount in 2050 on this trajectory. And that means that there are still greenhouse gas emissions going on, but they're offset by land sinks, or in some cases, just straight negative emissions technologies, which is shown as a small thing. That's carbon capture from the atmosphere. Now, one of the things about going on a trajectory like that is it's going to result in a whole series of job losses, but also job creations. And so net zero pathways that I'm going to be talking about has enormous implications for the types of employment that it's going to exist. There will be job loss in the petroleum and coal industries unless carbon capture and sequestration really improves. There's going to be job creation for renewable energy, power transmission line, carbon capture and storage, vehicle charging, building energy efficiency, and research to improve the innovation toolkit. So there are going to be many new opportunities for graduates, not only in the United States, but also worldwide. I'm going to be talking largely off of a study that I participated in as a committee member. This was sponsored by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the study came out in January of this year. It was titled Accelerating Decarbonization of the US Energy System. I'm only going to be talking about a portion of the study that pertains primarily to transportation. So the study focused on near and midterm high value policies, research investments and approaches. We're busy working on a second report now as a committee, and we hope that will come out in 2022. It'll take a look at more things, and in particular, it'll look at non-federal actions, so state, local, and private actions. The study itself was sponsored by foundations and from the National Academy of Sciences President's Fund. And I already said this, We're interested in a 2050 target for net zero. We looked at a wide range of sectors: transportation, electricity, industry, buildings, and biofuels. Again, I'm only going to talk about a portion of that in this talk. We weren't really asked to determine whether the nation should move to net zero, but only what might be the best route to get there. I should also say this report is broadly compatible with recent announcements from the Biden administration. We're still waiting, of course, to see what Congress will do with the proposals on infrastructure and reconciliation. So the report put forward 5 technology goals, and I'm going to be talking about each of them from the standpoint of, again, transportation. First is electrify energy services and transportation. Second is improve energy efficiency and productivity. The third is produce carbon-free electricity. Doesn't do any good to electrify energy for transportation if we're not getting carbon-free electricity. Expand the innovation toolkit and plan, permit, and build critical infrastructure. That's important because infrastructure takes a long time to build, to permit, and it lasts a long time. So we have to get going on what infrastructure we need for the new decarbonization world. At the same time as pursuing these technology goals, the report emphasized that we also have socioeconomic goals to pursue. First is strengthen the US economy. Second is support communities, businesses, and workers. I mentioned in terms of strengthening the US economy about building up manufacturing capabilities. Supporting communities that are going to be adversely affected by the transition is also important. Promote equity and inclusion in pursuing these changes, and maximize cost effectiveness, which I'll be talking about throughout this talk. So the context of this talk: net zero carbon emissions by 2050 for transportation modes. Given the fleet turnover time and infrastructure longevity and research times, this next decade, I think, is critical for us to be getting onto a net zero trajectory. I'm going to focus on the United States, but certainly the actions that I'm going to be talking about are relevant to other countries. For example, China has pledged to be net zero by 2060, and other countries are also making pledges. I'm going to focus on transportation, but I'll say a few liquid fuel and vehicle production. These are actions that are relevant for all carbon generating entities. I should also mention that I'm going to be drawing from the National Academy studies, but there are a whole series of deep decarbonization studies that exist. They have different geographic frameworks. Some are global, some are regional, some are national, some are statewide. They have varying timeframes and goals, varying attention to cost, milestones, and policy options. They're often scenario-based, so that different scenarios are proposed. This I put together just to show you the challenge that we faced. These are 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States, is compiled by the Environmental Protection Agency. This is not including the supply chains, it's just including direct emissions from vehicles. And I put in 1990, 2005, and 2018. And if you take a look at the first 5 rows, you can see that they dominate. These are roadway vehicles, passenger cars, light duty trucks, other trucks, buses, motorcycles. So that if we're going to make progress on deep decarbonization, we've really got to take a look at roadway vehicle emissions. After that, commercial aircraft and other aircraft is a major sector that we need to worry about. Ships and boats are a bit smaller, and rail. Ships and boats and rail are about comparable, and pipelines have a surprising amount of emissions associated with them. So this is a lot of emissions to try and change over a 50-year period. I'm going to talk about actions for a net zero pathway in transportation. And I'll start with energy efficiency. Then I'll talk about electrification, decarbonization, power generation, network infrastructure, tackle non-energy greenhouse gas emissions, and innovate to create a net zero toolkit. And I should emphasize, we need to pursue socioeconomic goals at the same time as pursuing these technology goals. So what can we do to improve energy efficiency and productivity? Well, first thing is increase vehicular fuel efficiency. A good example of that is making vehicles lighter so they require less energy. That should be possible with automation, improving safety, and that includes partial automation. And so people can feel that they're still safe in smaller vehicles and big SUVs. New materials can also contribute to lightweighting. Switching to non-motorized modes of travel, bicycle and walking, and switch to more energy efficient modes, switch from trucking to rail or water, single occupancy vehicles to shared vehicles, and air travel to rail. Fourth is reduce travel, telework, teleconference, as we're doing right now, reduce sprawl, reduce congestion, fewer crashes with automation is a possibility, and connectivity, that is communication among vehicles and vehicles to infrastructure, should improve the efficiency of the entire transportation network. And then there is an important piece that to improve energy efficiency in battery and vehicle manufacture. Just some examples of what I was just talking about. On the far left is my granddaughter and daughter-in-law on their way to work and childcare, and they're using a bike. In the top middle is a younger version of me doing a high-speed rail trip in Japan rather than taking a plane. I'm sitting right beside my thesis advisor, Carlos de Gonzo. On the far right is an example of what I'm doing right now, which is a remote presence on a robot that can move around a building and attend conferences. And then even things that are mundane, like making sure that your tire pressure is correct, can also help with energy efficiency. And it's in the historical record that fuel efficiency improvements are possible. Back in the 1970s, there was a big improvement in fuel economy. Then it kind of lagged for a number of years as motor vehicle manufacturers pursued different things like power. And then when regulations like the corporate average fuel economy standard came in, you started to see more declines. And you can see this graph goes from 2020 up to 2050 and forecasts that more fuel economy in conventional vehicles is possible. Now, the costs of these energy efficiency and productivity measures vary a great deal. Some of them have both private and social positive net benefits, but they typically require a capital investment followed by cost savings. That's becoming the case, by the way, for fuel efficient vehicles such as battery electric vehicles. Some of them are inconvenient or risky. A good example right now is transit. In the pandemic world, transit ridership has really dropped, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with shared ride service in a post-pandemic world. There are lots and lots of ways to pursue energy efficiency in productivity, lots of policies available. That includes standards, tax incentives, grants, procurement requirements, and others. So, second strategy, electrify transportation as much as possible. Plug-in battery electric vehicles are something that we hope will become dominant, especially in urban areas where there are shorter trips. One of the questions here is whether fuel cell vehicles can become competitive with battery electric vehicles for long hauls. The fuel cell vehicles typically have larger range. We need charging and hydrogen infrastructure to provide for motive power for these battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. And then railroads need to switch over. They're diesel electric right now. They could be battery electric. They could be fuel cells, or they can connect to power lines. Ships can switch to fuel cells, nuclear, or low carbon liquid fuels. Just a few examples. I thought for the historical record, I should show a picture of Thomas Edison and his battery electric vehicle. In the early part of the 20th century, battery electric vehicles were competitive with internal combustion engines. But of course, we all know that the internal combustion engine became dominant over time. In the upper right is a modern battery electric vehicle, which is quite competitive now with conventional vehicles for many buyers. And then on the bottom is an example of a railway operating with a catenary. So it's drawing its power, motive power, from the grid. Here's a projection of what cost might be like for buying vehicles of different kinds. There's cars, crossovers, sport utility vehicles in 2018 and 2025. And there's conventional vehicles, battery electric vehicles with different ranges, and plug-in hybrid vehicles. And you can see that in 2018, the battery electric and the plug-ins were a higher capital cost than conventional vehicles. But that gap between conventional vehicles and the alternative fueled vehicles is projected to be closing as batteries become cheaper. And of course, the operating cost for battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles is lower. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is that electric vehicle sales are increasing. This is a graph of electric vehicles sold in the US monthly from 2010 to 2025. And you can see it has really shot up in the last year, and we're now over 2% of sales. Well, we have to go quite a bit higher than that if we're going to be net zero by 2050. Here's the electric vehicle sales in the rest of the world. This graph cuts out at 2018, so it doesn't show the recent increase in sales. You can see that China is kind of the dominant market in the world for electric vehicles, with Scandinavia being a surprisingly high fraction. And the United States is shown at the bottom with the increases that I've already talked about. And of course, the reason that we need to emphasize switching over as soon as possible is that fleet turnover is very slow. The average age of light duty vehicles in the US is about 12 years. Complete fleet turnover requires 20 years without going through some premature scrappage. So we need to get a fairly significant fraction of battery electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles being sold in the next decade. So decarbonized power generation. This is closely tied, synergistic with the transportation changes for electrification. And there are various ways of achieving this decarbonization. We can increase the renewable power generation share, that's solar, geothermal, and wind. At the same time as doing that, we need to make sure we have a stable supply of power. Typical means of doing that is to have batteries or pump storage available that would provide electricity, say when solar is not available due to the nighttime. We can try and preserve nuclear generation of power. And we can transition coal-fired and gas-fired power plants to a regime of carbon capture and sequestration. That technology exists. It's expensive, but it's certainly a possible course of action. This is just an example, some examples of renewable power. The upper left is a picture I took in New Zealand of a geothermal plant that's been in existence for several decades. In the upper right is a typical wind turbine. And then in the bottom are solar cells. And certainly there are many parts of the United States where solar is quite a viable option for power generation right now. And the non-fossil share of energy has been increasing. It's 20% in 2019. Showing on this graph, you can see that petroleum is still a big portion. Natural gas has been growing. Coal has been shrinking as a proportion of energy. And the non-fossil share, nuclear, wind, biofuels, hydroelectricity, have all been increasing. And so we want that increase to keep going on, and we want to move natural gas and coal to carbon capture and sequestration if they continue to be part of the energy mix. And there've been a whole series of studies on power decarbonization, and I'm not going to go into them all, that suggests that this sort of changes that I'm talking about can be achieved without enormous cost. This is a graph of energy system costs as a percentage of gross domestic product. And you can see it's the historical record up until about 2018. And then there are forecasts going forward from various studies that suggest that this decline should be able to continue or at least stabilize in the future. Another portion or action that we need to take going forward is to build critical infrastructure. We need electricity transmission and charging stations. If we're going to have fuel cells as a competitive alternative, we need hydrogen filling stations. I've already talked about carbon capture and storage. We need manufacturing for batteries and renewable power. And we need to build the infrastructure for connectivity if we're going to pursue that action. And just a couple of examples. This is a transmission line, and one of my sons playing ultimate frisbee underneath the transmission line. On the right is a typical scenario for carbon capture and storage. The carbon dioxide is captured at the power plant, piped, and then stored in sequestration underground. Non-energy greenhouse gas emissions also have to be tackled. We need an industrial process improvement, in particular cement, which of course is an important input into transportation infrastructure. We'd like to enhance land and water sequestration of carbon. That's going to require some transportation. And we'd like to reduce non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, in particular methane. And leaking pipelines are an issue here. Let me just give you two examples. One on the left is a study of Boston methane leaks, and you can see that the old aging pipelines in the Boston area have quite a bit of methane leakage. On the right is an incident where a pipeline is blown out and fires are occurring, and quite a bit of methane is escaping to the atmosphere. Again, for both of these, we'd like to reduce these leaks and incidents as much as we can. And then I think I'm talking to a number of researchers, so I thought I should talk about useful innovations that we need to pursue. Zero emission hydrogen production. Right now, most of our hydrogen is coming from fossil fuels. Synthesis of low carbon liquid methane and liquid hydrocarbon fuels. This is going to be important for air transport. It's really hard to electrify long distance air travel. And so one alternative is to use these low carbon liquid fuels. New manufacturing processes, hydrogen direct reduction of iron, energy efficient cement. Carbon dioxide capture and storage processes are something that we need to work on. High yield bioenergy crops, again, need some research and deployment and development. And direct air capture of carbon dioxide. I mentioned that right at the beginning of my talk. And that might be an alternative to things like low carbon liquid fuels for long distance air transport. If that could be offset by direct air capture, that might be a viable alternative. So I've given you 6 action areas for moving forward. They're not easy, but they're technically feasible. Each of them suggests that they're going to be major transportation for transportation and for transportation professionals like us. And I should emphasize that the socioeconomic goals that I put forward right at the beginning are also critical here for doing things. There's a consensus that's emerging from a lot of the studies on net zero emissions has many technically feasible pathways. I mentioned that there are all sorts of studies and they tend to move into a consensus. Transportation electrification is a critical element, but many other actions can contribute. Battery electric vehicles are currently less costly than fuel cell vehicles, but suffer from limited range and charging availability. Despite industry claims, extra costs should not be prohibitive and likely are less than the social costs of climate change and air emissions. Cost reductions in renewable power generation and batteries have been game changers for the feasibility of those actions. I mentioned at the beginning that we're still working with the study committee on a second report. I'd be interested in any of your suggestions. We're thinking about additional topics like agriculture and public health, more interest in water, and a broader range of federal actors. Rather than just doing federal, we should include state, local, private sector, non-governmental organizations. Well, I'd like to thank you with that. The report I've drawn much of this material from, although I've put in my own opinion, as you all probably noticed at times. You can download the report for free and kind of report resources at the National Academies Press, nap.edu/decarbonization. And you can look for any sorts of updates on our study at the study website, nationalacademies.org/decarbonization. And that ends my talk, and I'll be happy to take some questions at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Chris Hendrickson, for your wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. Decarbonization is really an important task to undertake and also a mission to achieve. I'm really grateful to you for your continued support of CAMMSE. So thank you very much again. I believe we do have a question here in the chat box. So the question is, since generating electricity also produce carbon dioxide, so how electric vehicle will benefit the reduction of CO2?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I tried to make that point in my talk, but let me try another approach to it. You're clearly not getting full benefit if your power grid is being powered by coal-fired generating plants that are emitting carbon dioxide. And that's why what you want to do is have vehicle electrification go hand in hand with decarbonizing the power grid. And decarbonizing the power grid can be achieved by switching over to renewable power, that's wind and solar and that type of thing, nuclear power, or to invest in carbon capture and sequestration for gas-fired plants or coal-fired plants. Now, that still doesn't get us to zero for power generation because there's emissions associated with manufacturing things like wind turbine blades, but it still makes a much better reduction in greenhouse gas emissions when you couple the electric vehicle with the net zero power generation grid. You could also make the same argument about fuel cell vehicles. Right now, a lot of the hydrogen that's being sold commercially in the United States is coming from fossil fuels. And so there are greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. The switch over to other ways of producing hydrogen would be beneficial. For example, you could use solar power to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen and capture the hydrogen from that. So you need kind of the systematic approach when you're thinking about trying to do electrification of vehicles plus changes in the power grid system or the hydrogen production system. By the way, I should mention, there are lots of challenges in electrifying vehicles. We still have to come up with good ways of making sure that households have availability of charging. Many households in the United States do not have dedicated parking places, do not have dedicated garages. An example are people living in apartments who don't have their own parking spots. And so coming up with community ways of doing charging is going to be key to try and expand the share of battery electric vehicles in the vehicle fleet.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chris Hendrickson. So this is the only question from the chat box. So any more questions from the audience here?
Well, I can tell you that it's going to be a challenging few decades as we go forward and confront the problems associated with climate change, plus the mitigation strategies that I've been talking about.
Chris, this is Randy Markmill. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Randy. Good to see you.
Just a comment. It seems to me that the key to making decarbonization happen is to get the private sector involved. And the ways to do that, people have studied that quite a bit, but I think that's the key, because we, the people, that is the government, have a hard time. You look at the problems that we've had with getting people to take COVID shots. The government can't do it alone. We've got to get the private sector involved. So just a comment.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Randy. And one of the encouraging things that's going on right now in the vehicle electrification world is that there are a number of private corporations who are really making major investments in producing battery electric vehicles. Not only the small vehicles that have been kind of standard in the area, but we're starting to see SUVs and light duty trucks come out as battery electric. And so the types of vehicles that are available that are electric are really expanding. And that's really because of the private sector making decisions to put those into the marketplace.
Indeed. Thank you for your talk. Enjoyed it.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you. So any more questions from the audience?
There you go. I gave you a little longer break, Wei.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Chris Hendrickson, for your continuous support of CAMMSE. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So at this point, we will take about a 15 minutes break. So we are gonna start at 9 o'clock again. And we will be holding our first technical session on emerging mobility service, planning and operations. And the moderator would be Dr. John Avan from University of Connecticut. And I would also like to take this opportunity to remind you, and particularly our moderators, to strictly stick to our time schedule and not to let any session overrun. So with that, we'll see you in 15 minutes or so. Thank you all very much. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hendrickson. Yeah, again. Nice to see you here. Yeah.